Anu's first visit to planet Earth marked the beginning of a series of events that would profoundly shape human history over the millennia. The decisions made on that occasion eventually culminated in the creation of Adam, Homo sapiens as we know him today, but also gave rise to a rivalry that unleashed epic conflicts between Enki, Enlil, and their descendants. Before such disputes, however, hostilities had already manifested between the House of Anu and the House of Allelu, an ancient feud that intensified on Earth, culminating in the so-called War of the Titans. This confrontation involved the gods of heaven and the gods of earth of dark hues, and reached its peak with the rebellion of the Igigi. As described in the text Kingship in Heaven, these conflicts occurred in the early stages of the Nibiru colonization shortly after Anu's initial visit. The adversaries mentioned are identified as mighty ancient gods, those who reigned in ancestral times. The account describes a sequence of events, including the rise and fall of leaderships such as the usurpation of Nibiru's throne, Alalu's flight, Anu's arrival on Earth, and his confrontation with Kumarbi. The narrative, expanded by Hittite and Hurrian texts collectively known as the Kumarbi cycle, was reconstructed based on damaged clay tablets, requiring meticulous archaeological work. Researchers such as H. Guterbach and H. Otten gathered fragments and different versions to assemble a coherent chronology. This reconstruction revealed fascinating details, but also left intriguing gaps. One example of this is the uncertainty regarding how long Kumarbi remained in orbit after his confrontation with Anu. What is known is that after expelling the cursed stones from his belly, he descended to Earth. For unknown reasons, possibly described in lost parts of the tablets, Kumarbi headed to the Abzu in search of Ea. At this point, the text, already fragmented, introduces the storm god, Teshub, identified by the Sumerians as Ishkur-Adad, Enlil's youngest son. Teshub's presence infuriates Kumarbi, especially when the new god is announced as the heir to important attributes, including wisdom, which was to be taken from Kumarbi. Consumed by rage, Kumarbi went to Nippur, Enlil's headquarters. Although the following passages are damaged, it is mentioned that, after 7 months, Kumarbi returned to the Abzu to consult with Ea again. Ea then advised Kumarbi to ascend to the heavens and seek the help of Lama, described as the mother of the two gods and the probable matriarch of the rival dynasties. Taking advantage of the situation, Ea offered to transport Kumarbi to the celestial abode in his celestial vehicle, called the Mar-da-da-ga-di-da, or celestial chariot, known to the Akkadians as Te-Ea-Rita, the flying vehicle. However, upon realizing that Ea was approaching without the proper authorization from the assembly of the gods, Lama launched winds with lightning against his ship, forcing him to return to Earth. Instead of returning completely to Earth after his defeat, Kumarbi chose to remain in the terrestrial firmament, alongside the gods orbiting the planet. These gods were known to the Hittites as Irsira, those who see and orbit, and identified by the Sumerians as the Igigi. With time on his hands, Kumarbi was consumed by disturbing thoughts that haunted his mind. He began to plot evil, driven by a fixed idea, to become the father of all gods, and thus achieve the status of supreme deity. To bring this plan to fruition, Kumarbi sought the support of the Irsira, who joined his cause. Then he put on swift shoes and descended to Earth, where he sent emissaries to demand that the divine leaders recognize his claim. This ultimatum, however, was the spark that led Anu to decide to end the rebellion once and for all. Determined to defeat the grandson of Allelu, his old adversary, Anu summoned Teshub, the storm god, and also his own grandson, with the mission of eliminating Kumarbi. In one of the battles fought between Teshub and Kumarbi, the fight involved the participation of 70 gods, all in their respective celestial vehicles. Although many scenes of these battles are lost due to the fragmentation of the clay tablets, what is known is that Teshub emerged victorious. However, Kumarbi's defeat was not enough to end the conflict. Other texts from the Kumarbi cycle reveal that, before being defeated, Kumarbi had impregnated a mountain goddess, thus generating an heir and avenger, the stone god, named Ul-Ikumi. Kumarbi kept his son hidden among the Irsira gods, where he began to prepare him for his mission. He instructed the young god to grow strong and, when the time came, attack the beautiful city of Kumia, belonging to Teshub. The order was clear: confront the storm god, destroy him completely, and strike down all the gods of the sky as if they were birds. After conquering Earth, Ul-Ikumi was to ascend to the heavens and take the throne of Nibiru by force. After giving these orders, Kumarbi disappears from the texts. Meanwhile, Ul-Ikumi grew in secret and reached gigantic proportions. When he was finally sighted, it was by the sun god Utu Shamash, who noticed him during one of his celestial journeys. Alarmed, Utu immediately went to Teshub's dwelling to alert him about the appearance of the Avenger. Upon receiving the news, Teshub served food and drink to Utu to calm him down, and then instructed him to board his celestial chariot and observe Ul-Ikumi directly. Teshub, determined to assess the threat for himself, ascended to the observation mountain, where he could finally behold the stone god with his own eyes. Upon encountering the colossal figure of the stone god, Teshub was overcome by a wave of rage. He clenched his fist in a gesture of determination, aware that there was no choice but to face his adversary in combat. Preparing for battle, Teshub ordered his celestial vehicle to be readied. The Hittite texts refer to it by the Sumerian name Dug.ga, translated as the lead rider that floats. The detailed instructions for the preparation of the vehicle, heavily based on Sumerian terminology, are noteworthy for the technical complexity described. The sequence begins with connecting the vehicle to the Great Breaker, a powerful mechanical unit. On the front, the bull that ignites was installed, a power unit responsible for its ignition. On the rear, they positioned the Bull of the High Missile, covered in gold for greater protection and performance. The navigation system, called the One That Shows the Way, was carefully adjusted and activated with stones of energy, likely crystals or devices that provided the necessary power. As the main armament, the vehicle was equipped with the Thunderer, a weapon capable of firing projectiles up to 30 leagues away. The Thunderer was loaded with 800 firestones, which provided the destructive power needed for the battle. Furthermore, the lightning that shines fearfully, another component of the arsenal, was removed from its storage chamber and prepared for the final confrontation. Finally, the completed vehicle, referred to as MR-GID.DA, was ready to be used in combat. Meanwhile, Teshub, from the heavens and amidst the clouds, observed the imposing stone god, preparing to face his rival directly. The initial clashes were intense but unfavorable for Teshub, who could not win alone. It was then that his brother Ninurta entered the battle to assist him. Despite their joint effort, the stone god proved impenetrable, advancing relentlessly to the gates of Kumia, the city of the storm god. Inside the city, Hebat, Teshub's wife, followed the battle with anxiety, receiving reports of events in a chamber designated for divine communications. However, the destructive force of the missiles launched by Ul-Ikumi was so great that it forced her to abandon her position. Hebat, prevented from continuing to hear messages from Teshub or the other gods, made a desperate decision. She sent a messenger with swift shoes to find the gathered gods and obtain information about the unfolding of the battle. The fear she carried was profound. The possibility that the stone god had defeated Teshub, her husband, and the noble prince. Teshub, despite the adversities, had survived. Advised by his chamberlain to seek refuge in a mountainous region, he categorically refused, declaring that if he did so, there would no longer be a king in heaven. Determined to face the crisis, they decided together to seek out Ea in the Abzu, in search of an oracle capable of interpreting the ancient tablets with the words of destiny. Upon understanding that Kumarbi had created a monster whose threat exceeded all limits, Ea immediately sought Enlil to alert him to the imminent danger. Ulikumi will block access to heaven and the sacred houses of the gods. With this warning, an assembly of the great Anunnaki was convened, where the gods debated the situation without being able to find a solution. The answer came when Ea, in a flash of ingenuity, suggested a strategy. He ordered that an ancient instrument be brought from a sealed depot, the old cutter used by the stone cutters. The plan was simple yet bold, to cut the feet of Ul-Ikumi, the stone god. The execution was successful, leaving the monster crippled. When the news spread, the gods gathered at the assembly site and, in unison, clamored against Ul-Ikumi, celebrating the weakness imposed upon the Colossus. Even though debilitated, Ul-Ikumi did not yield. Teshub, determined to end the confrontation, boarded his celestial vehicle and set off to face him at sea. The battle was fierce, but the stone god maintained his defiant stance, proclaiming, "Kumia I shall destroy, the sacred house I shall seize, the gods I shall expel. I shall ascend to heaven to assume kingship." Unfortunately, the final lines of the Hittite text narrating this clash are completely destroyed. However, it is possible that the conclusion was similar to the Sanskrit account of the final battle between Indra and the demon Vritra, described in terrifying detail. In this myth, lightning and thunder cross the skies while Indra and Vritra wage an apocalyptic battle. Vritra throws sharp darts and scorching lightning, while Indra, with pride and ferocity, responds with a rain of iron and brilliant thunderbolts, culminating in the end of his adversary. Trampled, pierced, and crushed, the demon falls from his tower made of clouds, defeated by the final lightning bolt that Indra hurls at his shoulders. If we are to connect these legends, it is possible that the war between the gods and the titans of Greek mythology has its origin in these ancestral accounts. The meaning of the term titans remains uncertain, but if it is of Sumerian origin, it could derive from Tiite An, literally translated as those who live in heaven. This term is surprisingly appropriate to describe the Igigi, led by Kumarbi, while their adversaries would be the Anunnaki, those who are on earth. Sumerian texts do indeed reference an ancient and decisive battle between a grandson of Anu and a demon belonging to a rival clan. This clash is recorded in the account known as the Myth of Zu, which may have served as the basis for Hittite and Hindu tales, as well as inspiring other mythological traditions over time. The protagonist of the legend is Ninurta, son of Enlil with his half-sister Sud, and the story takes place shortly after Anu's visit to Earth. During this period, the Anunnaki were completely involved in their assigned tasks, both in the Abzu and in Mesopotamia. The gold extracted from the depths of the Earth was smelted and refined before being transported to the Sipar spaceport. There, shuttles made constant trips, carrying the precious metal to orbital stations operated by the Igigi. From there, the gold proceeded in larger ships toward the mother planet, Nibiru, transported at regular intervals according to the proximity of the two planets in their distinct orbits. This entire complex operation was carefully managed from the Mission Control Center in Nippur. In this location rose an elevated platform where the dir.ga room was located, the most restricted and sacred space. Known as the Holy of Holies, the room housed celestial maps and panels containing the fundamental orbital data to coordinate interplanetary travel, the Tablets of Destinies. The narrative takes a dark turn when Zu, a malicious god, gains access to this secret chamber and steals the essential tablets. With them in his possession, Zu came to control the destinies of the Anunnaki, both on Earth and on Nibiru. The story, which has reached us through fragments of original texts combined with Assyrian and Babylonian versions, remained incomplete for a long time. Crucial details, such as Zu's real identity and how he managed to invade the dir.ga room, were missing due to damaged parts of the clay tablets. The mystery was only solved in 1979 when researchers W. Hallow and W.L. Moran utilized a tablet found in the Babylonian collection at Yale University to reconstruct the beginning of the legend. It was then that the enigma began to clear up. In the Sumerian language, the name Zu means "he who knows," indicating someone with great knowledge. In various passages of the legend, the villain is referred to as Anzu, or "he who knows the heavens," evidencing his connection to the space program that connected Earth to Nibiru. In fact, the restored excerpt of the story reveals that Zu was an orphan who had been adopted by the Igigi, the astronauts responsible for the shuttles and orbital platforms. Under their tutelage, Zu learned the secrets of the sky and interplanetary travel, acquiring the knowledge that would make him a threat to the Anunnaki. The narrative begins with the Igigi, gathered coming from all parts, deciding to bring a complaint to Enlil. They complained that, up to that moment, no place had been created on Earth where they could rest and recover from the exhausting space routine, marked by the absence of gravity and long periods of work on the orbital platforms. In other words, they were demanding a recreation and leisure center. Zu was chosen as the group's spokesperson and sent to Nippur to present the request. Enlil, the father of the gods, received Zu at the Diur Enki, the link between heaven and earth, and reflected on the request. While he pondered the Igigi's claim, he studied the celestial Zu with attention. Something about him seemed strange. Despite being dressed in the astronaut's uniform, it was evident to Enlil that Zu was not part of the usual group. This suspicion grew as the Supreme Commander observed the emissary. Meanwhile, Ea, Enlil's half-brother, and aware of Zu's true origin, suggested a strategy to buy time. He recommended that Enlil allow Zu to remain at headquarters, postponing his decision on the Igigi's request. "Let him enter your service in the sanctuary, in the innermost chamber," suggested Ea. "Let him be the one to guard the way." Following Ea's advice, Enlil ordered Zu to assume a guardian position at the entrance of Nippur's most secret chamber. Thus, an adversary god, a descendant of Alalu, was admitted into the heart of the sanctuary. According to the legend, Zu, now in his new post, continuously observed Enlil in his role as father of the gods and as guardian of the link between heaven and earth. He constantly viewed the tablets of destinies. The sight of these tablets, which controlled celestial and terrestrial decrees, inspired Zu to devise an ambitious and treacherous plan. The removal of Enlil he conceived in his heart. "I will take the tablet of destinies, the decrees of the gods I will rule. I will establish my throne, I will be the master of the celestial decrees. The Igigi in space I will command." Zu saw the perfect opportunity on the day Enlil, seeking a moment of rest, left the chamber to swim. Without hesitation, Zu invaded the secret room, seized the tablets of destinies, and, mounted on his bird, fled to the Hursagmu, the mountain of celestial chambers. The moment Zu stole the tablets, something extraordinary and devastating occurred. Suspended were the divine formulas. The brightness went out. Silence prevailed. In space, the Igigi were confused. The brilliance of the sanctuary had been taken away. Initially, Enlil was in shock. Gaping, he processed the gravity of what had happened while communications were gradually restored. As news of the theft spread, the gods of the earth were gathering one by one. On Nibiru, Anu was also informed of the incident and recognized the urgency of capturing Zu to recover the tablets of destinies and restore order. The question was, who would have the courage to face Zu, now incredibly powerful, hiding in the distant mountain? Several young gods known for their bravery were consulted, but none were willing to accept the mission. The reason was clear. By stealing the tablets, Zu had usurped Enlil's brilliance, a power so great that it made confronting him directly impossible. He who opposes Zu will become like clay. Before the brilliance, the gods are consumed. At this critical moment, Ninurta, Enlil's legitimate son, volunteered. His mother, Sud, reinforced his decision, reminding him that Zu's betrayal not only threatened Enlil's authority, but also deprived Ninurta and his descendants of their legitimate inheritance. Sud, realizing the magnitude of the challenge, advised Ninurta to adopt a strategic approach. She suggested that he attack Zu with a weapon of brilliance, but only after approaching the enemy under the cover of a dust cloud. To help him, Sud offered him her 7 whirlwinds that raise the dust. With renewed courage and following his mother's instructions, Ninurta headed to Mount Hazi, a location also associated with the legends of Kumarbi. There, he prepared his celestial chariot, attaching the weapons and whirlwinds before setting off to confront Zu in a dreadful war, a violent battle. On the slopes of the mountain, Ninurta and Zu finally faced each other. Upon spotting his opponent, Zu exploded in fury, making the mountain shine like daylight with the power of his brilliance. Lightning bolts were launched violently, but the dust storm raised by Ninurta's whirlwinds obscured his vision, frustrating his attacks. Without recognizing who was facing him, Zu shouted, "I have seized all authority. The decrees of the gods I now direct. Who are you who comes to fight with me? Explain yourself." Ninurta, undaunted, advanced, declaring that he had been sent by Anu in person to capture him and recover the tablets of destinies. Hearing this, Zu extinguished his brilliance, plunging the mountain into complete darkness. Even so, Ninurta continued his assault. He fired a lightning bolt directly from his chariot towards Zu, but the attack was ineffective. The lightning returned, unable to penetrate the barrier of power Zu had acquired. With this, the battle was interrupted. The weapons stopped in the middle of the mountain. They did not defeat Zu. Confused about how to proceed, Ninurta sent a request for help to his younger brother, Ishkur-Adad, asking him to consult their father. Ishkur, obedient, took the report of the battle to Enlil, who responded with words of encouragement, "Do not tire of battle. Prove your strength." Furthermore, Enlil sent a practical solution, a Tilyu, a type of missile, to be coupled to Ninurta's Thunderer, a projectile launcher. He instructed his son to approach Zu in his whirlwind bird until both were wing to wing. From this strategic position, Ninurta was to aim at the pinions of the wings of Zu's bird and release the missile, letting the Tilyu fly like a lightning bolt. When the flaming brilliance takes hold of the feathers, the wings will flutter like butterflies. Then Zu will be vanquished. Although the battle scenes are missing from the clay tablets containing the legend, fragments found in the ruins of a Hittite archive in Sultan Tepe reveal that more than one whirlwind bird participated in the fighting. Ninurta, following his father's instructions, gathered 7 whirlwinds to raise the dust, equipped his celestial chariot with the weapons of the 111 winds, and set out to face Zu. The earth shook, the heavens darkened, the feathers of Zu's wing were vanquished. Zu was captured and taken to Nippur. The Tablet of Destinies was returned to its rightful place, restoring sovereignty and order. As described, sovereignty again entered the Ikur, the divine formulas were returned. After being captured, Zu was brought to trial before a martial court formed by 7 great Anunnaki. Declared guilty, he received the death sentence, with Ninurta charged with executing the decision. He slit his throat. Ancient drawings depict the trial, with Zu, associated with the Igigi, represented as a demonic bird, boasting an extra eye in the center of his forehead. A Mesopotamian relief clearly shows his execution. Zu's defeat was celebrated as a great liberation by the Anunnaki. However, to ensure that Zu's spirit, associated with betrayal and evil, would cause no further misfortunes, the account of his execution was transformed into a ritual that endured for human generations. This ritual included choosing a bull to represent Zu, which would be sacrificed to atone for the evils he had committed. In Assyrian and Babylonian versions of the legend, long instructions detail the preparations, pointing to a Sumerian origin. The bull, described as great and strong, who trod on clean pastures, was taken to the temple on the first day of a certain month to be purified. With a reed, the priest whispered into the animal's right ear, "Bull, you are the guilty Zu." On the 15th day, The bull was presented before the images of the 7 gods who judge and the symbols of the 12 celestial bodies of the solar system. There, Zeus' trial was reenacted. The accuser addressed the image of Enlil, the great shepherd, and asked rhetorical questions expressing the god's indignation. How could you give the guarded treasure to the enemy? How did you allow him to dwell in the pure place? How did you allow him access to your chambers? Then Ea and the other gods were called upon to appease Enlil's fury, who was seized with rage at the interrogation. At this moment, the priest playing the role of Ninurta stepped forward and asked the father, "Point my hands in the right direction. Give me the correct words of command." After this scene dramatizing the request for help to the father, the ritual proceeded to the presentation of evidence and then to the execution of the sentence. The bull, representing Zeus, was killed according to ceremonial instructions. Meanwhile, the priest recited the final verdict. The animal's liver was cooked in a sacrificial pot, while skin and muscles were burned inside the temple. However, the bull's evil tongue was left outside, symbolizing the expulsion of evil. After the execution, the priests representing the other gods chanted a hymn in honor of Ninurta. "Wash your hands, wash your hands. Now you are like Enlil on earth, let the gods rejoice with you." This moment recalled the promise made by the gods when looking for a volunteer to face Zeus. He who triumphed would be greatly exalted. "Your name shall be the greatest in the assembly of the great gods. Among the gods, your brothers, you shall have no equal. Glorified and mighty shall be your name before the gods." Ninurta had fulfilled his mission, and now the promise had to be honored. However, Ninurta's exaltation brought to the surface the constant rivalry for succession, a recurring theme that sowed future terrestrial wars among the gods. As Enlil's legitimate son, Ninurta was the heir to the throne of Nibiru, but not to the command on earth. However, with his victory, he was now proclaimed like Enlil on earth, a powerful title carrying deep implications. In Sumerian texts, the hierarchy of the gods was expressed by numbers in the sexagesimal system. Anu, as supreme ruler, was represented by the number 60, the highest. Enlil, his legal heir, was 50. Ea, the firstborn who would take over in Enlil's absence, held the number 40. The declaration that Ninurta was now equal to Enlil on earth indicated that he had received the number 50, elevating his position in the divine order. The text of the rituals ends partially mutilated, but it still contains legible excerpts mentioning other deities being instructed to recognize Ninurta's new position. "O Marduk, say to your king the words, 'I yield.' O Adad, say to your king the words, 'I yield.'" It is likely that the missing parts included the acceptance of sin, Enlil's first son born on earth, acknowledging Ninurta's rise in the hierarchy. We know that sin was represented by the number 30, while his siblings Shamash, Ishtar, and Adad held the numbers 20, 15, and 10, respectively. This hierarchical redistribution may have been a direct consequence of the prize awarded to the victor, but Marduk's number is not mentioned in the records. Zeus' conspiracy and his evil actions also remained alive in human memory, transforming over time into stories of demons with bird-like appearances. These beings, feared for their ability to cause afflictions and pestilence, gained names like Lilu, which evoked their nocturnal behavior and threatening howls. The most notorious female figure of these spirits, Lilitu, who became Lilith in biblical tradition, was portrayed as a winged goddess, naked with bird feet. The many Sharpu texts, or formulas for purification by fire, found in archaeological sites, were used as incantations against these evil spirits. They represent the precursors of spell and witchcraft rituals that continue to endure over the millennia. Despite solemn vows to respect Enlil's supremacy and Ninurta's position as second in command, the factors generating rivalry and disputes had not been eliminated. These tensions continued to resurface over the centuries. Foreseeing that Ninurta would face opposition, Anu and Enlil decided to equip him with new and powerful weapons. From Anu, he received the Shar-Ur, Supreme Hunter, and the Shar-Gaz, Supreme Destroyer. From Enlil came a singular weapon called IB, described as having 50 lethal heads. This weapon, the most feared and unique of all, caused Ninurta to become known as the Lord of Ib in Sumerian chronicles. With this extraordinary arsenal, Ninurta became Enlil's chief warrior, prepared to face any challenge to his father's position, and consequently to his own. The first major challenge arose when the Anunnaki working in the gold mines of the Abzu rebelled. This uprising, the events preceding it, and its consequences are described in detail in the Epic of Atrahasis, also known as the Chronicle of Earth, a text recording the events that led to the creation of Homo sapiens. According to the epic, after Anu's return to Nibiru and the division of Earth between Enlil and Enki, the Anunnaki of the Abzu worked in the mines for 40 counted periods, that is, 40 orbits of Nibiru, equivalent to about 144,000 Earth years. The work was arduous and ceaseless. Inside the mountains, in the deep holes, the Anunnaki toiled. Excessive was their labor for 40 counted periods. Mining operations never stopped. The Anunnaki toiled night and day. Over time, as the mine tunnels deepened, dissatisfaction grew. They complained, ground their teeth, grumbled in the excavations. Concerned about discipline, Enlil sent Ninurta to the Abzu to resolve the situation, but his presence only intensified tensions with Enki. Then, Enlil decided to visit the mines personally to assess the situation. It was then that the disgruntled Anunnaki seized the opportunity to mutiny. The Atrahasis Chronicle, with a vivid narrative, describes the events clearly. It recounts how the frustrated rebels threw their tools into the fire and, in the middle of the night, marched to Enlil's dwelling, shouting, "Let us kill him! Let us break the yoke!" Among the rebels, an unarmed leader tried to dissuade them, reminding them that Enlil was the chief officer of ancient times and suggesting negotiations. Meanwhile, Enlil, enraged, grabbed his weapons to confront the mutineers. However, his chief chamberlain restrained him, saying, "My lord, these are your children." Trapped in his own quarters by the rebels, Enlil sent an urgent message to Anu, asking him to come to Earth. When the supreme chief arrived, the great Anunnaki gathered in a martial court to discuss the crisis. Enki, as ruler of the Abzu, was also present. Enlil, indignant, demanded to know who had led the mutiny and called for the death penalty for the instigator. However, failing to gain Anu's support for his demand, Enlil expressed his discontent by submitting a resignation. "O noble ruler, take my office, take my power. I will ascend to the heavens with you." Anu, however, managed to calm Enlil. Recognizing the rigors of the miner's life, the supreme leader sought a more balanced solution to resolve the conflict. Encouraged, Enki opened his mouth and addressed the gods. He highlighted that something needed to be done to alleviate the burden of the Anunnaki working hard in the Abzu. Taking advantage of the presence of his sister Sud, who held the position of chief medical officer of the mission, Enki proposed a bold solution. Let her create a primitive worker. Let him bear the load. Let the worker take on the toil of the gods. Let him carry the yoke. In the following 100 lines of Atrahasis, as well as in several other Sumerian texts recounting the creation of man, the genetic engineering procedures performed by the Anunnaki are described in impressive detail. Enki suggested that an already existing being, the female of an anthropoid ape, a kind of ape woman, be used as a base to create the Lulu Amelu, the mixed worker. The idea was to combine the mold of the gods with this less evolved being using advanced genetic manipulation techniques. The process began with Sud purifying the essence of a young Anunnaki, which was combined with the egg of a simian female. The fertilized egg was then implanted into the womb of an Anunnaki woman, where it underwent the necessary gestation period. When the mixed creature was finally born, Sud lifted it in her arms and proclaimed, "I have created it. My hands have made it." Thus appeared the primitive worker, Homo sapiens, in the world. This milestone in human history occurred about 300,000 years ago through genetic engineering techniques and embryo implantation, methods that modern science has only begun to understand and replicate. Although natural evolution would eventually have resulted in the appearance of human beings, the texts suggest that the Anunnaki significantly accelerated this process with their intervention. For centuries, scientists sought the so-called missing link in the human evolutionary chain. Sumerian texts indicate that this link was actually a feat of genetic manipulation performed in a laboratory. However, this breakthrough did not happen immediately. The chronicles make it clear that the Anunnaki faced numerous problems and failures before achieving the perfect model of the primitive worker. Once the ideal model was obtained, the Anunnaki began mass production. 14 birth goddesses received implants of fertilized eggs, divided equally to generate 7 males and 7 females. As the workers grew, they were sent to the mines, relieving the burden of the Anunnaki. Over time, this new population began to take on more and more manual functions, replacing the gods in much of the heavy labor in the Abzu. The armed conflict between Enlil and Enki, which would soon occur, was triggered precisely by the primitive workers. As ore production in the Abzu improved, the workload of the Anunnaki operating the facilities in Mesopotamia also increased. Despite the mild climate compared to the Abzu, the region suffered from constant rains and floods caused by rivers. To control these problems, the Anunnaki were forced to perform heavy labor, such as building dikes and deepening canals. Over time, the dissatisfaction of the Mesopotamian Anunnaki grew. They also began to demand slaves, the creatures of cheerful countenance and thick, dark hair. According to the texts, the Anunnaki approached Enlil. They asked him for the black-headed ones. To the black-headed people, let the pickaxe be given. These events are described in the text known as the Myth of the Pickaxe, studied by Samuel N. Kramer. Although some excerpts are missing, it is clear that Enki refused to comply with Enlil's request to transfer the primitive workers to Mesopotamia. Enlil, determined to enforce his authority, resorted to force, cutting communications with the mother planet. He made a slash in the heaven-earth link. In truth, he launched an armed attack against the land of mines. In the Abzu, the Anunnaki reacted by gathering the primitive workers in a fortified enclosure in the center of the mining facilities, reinforcing their walls against an invasion. But Enlil arrived with an extraordinary weapon called Al-Aini, axe that produces power, equipped with a horn and an earth cutter. This weapon was capable of piercing walls and embankments. Enlil used it to open a hole in the fortifications. As the orifice widened, the primitive workers began to come out to meet him. He looked at the black-headed ones, fascinated. From that moment on, the primitive workers were assigned to perform manual tasks in both places. In the Abzu, they continued facing the work and enduring the fatigue, while in Mesopotamia, with shovels and pickaxes, they built the houses of the gods and the banks of the great canals. They cultivated food for the sustenance of the gods. Ancient drawings on cylinder seals show these Lulu, naked as animals, performing various tasks. Sumerian texts also record this initial and rudimentary stage of human development. When mankind was first created, they knew not the eating of bread, knew not the wearing of clothes. They ate plants with their mouth, grazing like sheep. They drank water from the ditches. However, a problem began to arise. For how long could Anunnaki women be asked or forced to play the role of birth goddess? Without Enlil's knowledge, but with Sud's connivance, Enki decided to resolve the issue by adding a new genetic trait to the primitive worker, the ability to procreate. The primitive workers, being hybrids of two distinct species, lacked the sexual knowledge necessary to generate offspring. This aspect echoes the biblical account of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Although the original Sumerian text that inspired the biblical narrative has not yet been discovered, several ancient drawings illustrate parts of this legend, including the Tree of Life, the forbidden fruit, and the confrontation between the Lord God and the serpent. In one of these drawings, Eve already appears wearing a skirt of leaves, while Adam remains naked, a detail also found in the biblical description. The serpent god is a central figure in these representations. In an illustration of great relevance, the name or epithet of this god appears written in archaic Sumerian through a pictograph. The star, symbolizing God, is combined with a triangular symbol read as Bur, Buru, or Buzur, terms that can be translated as God who deciphers secrets, God of the deep minds, or similar variations. In biblical Hebrew, the God who tempted Eve is called Nahash, often translated as serpent, but whose literal meaning is he who deciphers secrets or he who knows metals, exact parallels to the name of the serpent god in Sumerian texts. Another significant detail of this illustration is that the serpent god appears with feet and hands in shackles, suggesting that Enki was imprisoned after genetically modifying the primitive workers without proper superior authorization. This act, which granted humans the ability to procreate, infuriated Enlil. Furious with this innovation, Enlil ordered the expulsion of Adam, the improved Homo sapiens, from the abode of the righteous. Expelled from the settlements of the Anunnaki, humans began to wander the earth. As described in the Bible, "And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived, and bare Cain, and she again bare his brother Abel." The introduction of humanity marked a crucial moment in Earth's history. The gods were no longer alone on this planet, and although they were not yet fully aware of it, the Anunnaki would soon discover the decisive role the primitive workers would play in the wars between them. The story that emerges from these ancient Sumerian narratives invites us to rethink not only the origins of humanity, but also the roles the gods played in our cultural and existential formation. The texts describe an Earth inhabited by advanced beings, the Anunnaki, who faced challenges not very different from our own: rivalries, leadership crises, and morally ambiguous decisions. The creation of Homo sapiens, portrayed as an act of pragmatic necessity and not benevolence, demonstrates that our existence may have been motivated more by practical circumstances than by a divine design. The primitive workers, modeled to relieve the gods of hard labor, quickly became central pieces in a society marked by hierarchies and political tensions. This narrative reflects a disturbing duality: our creation as a solution to divine exhaustion and our eventual rebellion, as if the divine spark implanted in us had given rise to an autonomy that escaped the control of our creators. The unfolding events, from Enki's intervention in genetic modification to the confrontation between him and Enlil over the fate of humanity, reveal a power structure that frequently oscillated between cooperation and conflict. The expulsion of Adam, the dispersion of humans, and our capacity to procreate show how small acts of disobedience and innovation can trigger consequences that echo through ages. The accounts also suggest to us that, long before our own wars and disputes, Earth was already a stage for conflicts between superior forces. The introduction of humanity as a factor in these conflicts suggests that perhaps, from the beginning, we were destined to play a greater role than we imagined, not as mere servants, but as agents of transformation on a planet shared between mortals and immortals. These narratives, which transcend myth and flirt with history, challenge us to consider the possibility that the ancient gods were not merely spiritual abstractions, but tangible beings with agendas and limitations. By investigating their actions, motivations, and rivalries, we not only better understand the past, but also illuminate aspects of our present, questioning to what extent our own social structures, beliefs, and conflicts are inheritances of this primordial history. If humanity was truly created as a solution to the gods' problems, then we are, paradoxically, both a reflection of their genius and a reminder of their flaws. And, perhaps, the greatest lesson these narratives offer us is that the search for balance between creation and autonomy, between authority and freedom, is as old as our own existence. The story of the Anunnaki, if true, is not just their story, it is also ours. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support us, and become a member to get exclusive access to the audio versions of our material. This helps us a lot. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss any content. Until next time.